Direct seeding versus transplanting. When should you do what? That's what this video is all about. Coming up on Modern Grower. Hello, growers. I'm Diego, Diego. I'm the owner of Modern Grower, and for the past 10 years, I've done podcasts with hundreds and hundreds of market gardeners to talk to them about their market gardening journey. And my goal with this channel is to do one thing, to simply help you be more successful when you start a market gardening business. So we talk a lot of economics, we talk finance, we talk tools, tips, tricks, that type of thing. I'm not the person that helps you plant in the soil, helps you figure that part out. There's a lot of other great YouTubers who can do that. I'm more helping you get the book side straight, get the mental side straight, get the business right, make good decisions. And today we're talking on the decision of when should you transplant a crop versus direct seed a crop. This may sound obvious, and to others, it might be a total toss-up. I'm not quite sure, Diego. When do you do what? And some people might always transplant beets, and some people might always direct seed beets, without ever really giving a consideration to doing the opposite. So I tried to look at the benefits and drawbacks of direct seeding and transplanting at a very macro level. So this isn't crop specific. We're not talking about when should you transplant carrots versus, well, you would never transplant carrots. When would you direct seed beets versus hand transplant beets? We're talking all crops in general. We're just zooming out and we're throwing out the obvious ones. You always transplant tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers. You always direct seed carrots. You always direct seed things like radishes. So let's look at this so you can make the right decision, because the right decision is really going to save you labor, which means it's going to save you time. And more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, but it's going to save you money. Direct seeding. The biggest benefit of direct seeding is it is fast. With a Jang seeder and Earthway, you can dump the seed into the seeder, assuming the right roller's in there, walk up and down your bed, and you're done, and move on. It's done in minutes, less than 10 minutes, unless you have insanely long beds, but that's probably not most of you. Very, very quick. It's also low labor. It involves walking a seeder up and down a field. That's not intense in terms of the effort labor has to put out, and it's not intense in terms of the hours of labor required to do the task. Low labor means low cost, so that's a good thing for you. It is simple. One step. Walk the seeder up and down the bed, done. We're removing bed prep from the sake of this conversation because I'll assume whether you're transplanting a crop or direct seeding, you're going to do approximately the same bed prep. So we're moving bed prep out and we're saying this bed is prepped and ready to go. Therefore, if it's ready to go, seeding with a direct seeder, a Jang, an Earthway, something like that. Simple, easy, one step. Pour the seed in, pull or push, and you are done. It's mechanized. This is something that does not require hand labor. Yes, you are pushing it down the field or pulling it down the field, depending on which seeder you're using, but you're not placing the seeds individually by hand, at least on a market gardening scale. So it's mechanized. That's an advantage because mechanization speeds things up, and we want to mechanize everything we can in a business because that works to our advantage. It saves time, which saves money. It's a leverage point. We leverage labor, and we always want to try and do that. Another advantage is it's easy to train someone to do it. Now, if you've had employees, you'll know that anybody can screw anything up, but this is one of the easier tasks out there. This is in the same category as sweep the sidewalk, mow the lawn. It's not complicated. As long as you have the right seed plate or right roller in the seeder and you pour in the correct amount of seed, there's not a lot to mess up. Get the right number of rows per bed. It's easy. So those 5 things, those are the 5, I think, most important benefits. Fast, low labor, simple, mechanized, and easy to train. Now, there are some other benefits here, and these are debatable benefits, fringe benefits. I don't think they're as important as the others, but they definitely can weigh into a decision. So if you have a crop that could go either way, for example, lettuce might be one of them. Some people will hand transplant lettuce plugs. Some people will direct seed it. These types of things will help you decide. Also, if you have problems in your context, these little nuances will help you decide. Well, Diego, what does that mean? What problems can I have in my context? Everyone's biome is different. Everyone's climate's different. Everyone's soil's different. The temperature is different. So all of those things can affect how well transplants take, how well direct germination goes in the field. Soil conditions like fertility can affect things, pathogens in the field, birds around, insects, all those things can play issues. So if you're in Maine growing, you might have a different context than somebody growing in Texas. So these nuances help you make those types of decisions. One of the benefits of direct seeding is potentially better root development because there's no transplant shock and no root disturbance. The seed goes into the ground. It starts forming a taproot in the ground. It starts putting out feeder roots in the ground. It's never moved from that place. The roots can stay nice and happy there, live their whole life there. Where transplanting, you're starting it in a cell tray, maybe potting it up if it's something like tomatoes, so the roots get disturbed there. Then you go from that larger pot to the ground, or just a single transplant in the case of a lettuce plug. There is going to be some root disturbance when you transplant, but direct seeding, you're not having any of that. A lot of easily accessible equipment. When you direct seed, there is an abundance of tools out there in 2025 to do direct seeding. The most common seeders are the Earthway. That's a low-cost entry point seeder, does a good job. There's some hacks you can make on it to improve its performance. It is the kind of you get what you pay for type seeder. It's cheaper. It's more aimed at homesteaders or gardeners. It's not necessarily a market farm or farm grade seeder, but it will work. There's a lot of market farmers that have used an Earthway seeder very successfully. So you can make it work. The Jang is really the industry standard. Why? Because it's extremely accurate. It's versatile. It works in a lot of soil types. And then you have all sorts of smaller, more niche seeders, pinpoint seeders, 4-row seeders, 5-row seeders, those types of things that are sold by people like Johnny Seeds. Great products, but they have specific use cases and really require specific conditions to work optimally. So there's a lot of choices. If you have a specific problem, a specific thing you're trying to accomplish, you have a variety of tools at your disposal. That's a plus for direct seeding. You can choose a lot of options to get the job done. The other advantage is this is infinitely scalable at low cost. It's the cost of seeding an acre versus 10 acres with a Jang is the cost of paying someone to walk the beds. I don't have to have larger equipment to do more acreage. I don't have to have bigger equipment. I don't have to have more equipment. Whether I seed a quarter acre, 1 acre, 10 acres, I can use the same Jang seeder, and it scales at a relatively low cost. It's very different than other tools, which when you move up in acreage, they have to get bigger and bigger to make sense. For example, you're not going to rototill 10 acres. That would take absolutely forever. Or broad fork 10 acres, you'd use a different tool. Where this is a stretch, but with a push seeder, you could seed any amount of land by just paying someone to keep walking and walking and walking. The other advantage is it requires one piece of equipment, one seeder, and I'll include its seed plates or seed rollers with it. We'll call that a set. That's it. You don't need trays. You don't need add-ons or anything like that. One thing to store, one thing to maintain, one thing to bring into the field and bring back from the field at the end of the day. One thing. That's key, because when you have all sorts of bits that need to work together, that's more things to buy, more things to keep track of, more things to break, more things to maintain. This is one, and none of it's consumable. That's a win. You buy the seeder once and you use it for good. You're not consuming anything other than the calories that you burn when you push it up and down the field. It doesn't break down. It doesn't require fuel. It doesn't require paper chain pots or soil or anything like that to work. It just works. So one thing I typically tell people, because we sell the Jang seeder and we sell the paper pot transplanter, if you're deciding between the two, always direct seed whenever possible if you get good in-field germination. If you can use a direct seeder to put seed in the ground and get that crop to germinate successfully in the soil, always do it with a seeder. It's cheap, it's easy, and it's always better than transplanting. You would transplant if there's issues or specific conditions that would push you toward transplanting, and we will get to that coming up in the video. But you always want to direct seed whenever possible, because that is going to save you money. But it's not a perfect world. There's still free lunch. There are drawbacks, and the drawbacks to direct seeding are you're direct seeding into the field. And what's in the field? Local, natural conditions. They're uncontrolled conditions. That seed needs an optimum germination environment to do its best. If you plant 100 seeds and you want 100 to germinate, if you were in a lab doing this, you'd create perfect conditions because you want all 100 to germinate. But when you're dealing with nature in the field, there's going to be variability even across the bed. The soil is a little drier here, it's a little wetter there, it's a little harder here, it's a little softer there. So you're going to get the variability. You can't necessarily control that perfectly like you could in a lab setting or even a greenhouse setting. A little look ahead. So you have uncontrolled temperature, moisture, disease, micro and macrofauna in the field, and these can cause potential issues with germination. That's why a lot of people don't actually direct seed beets, is because they don't get good, consistent germination. This is why people don't direct seed tomatoes, because you don't get consistent germination, and tomatoes are a high value crop. You want to make sure that you get the plants where you need them, and you can't just rely on direct seeding. Now, if you have a high tunnel, a low tunnel, a greenhouse, you can start to control some of this by heating, by watering, by ventilating, by doing different things to the soil. But you're never going to be able to control a bed block nearly as much as you could a single cell tray. 72, 128, 200, right? If I have one of those, I can really baby that thing, put it in the perfect environment. I can put it under lights. I can control the soil, the moisture, put it in a germination chamber. I can do all those things. I can't do that when I'm in the field. So That's one knock against direct seeding. And that's why I said you always direct seed asterisk if you can get good in-field germination. Why might you not? Because you can't control all the conditions. The other thing that is a potential drawback to direct seeding is you can't see the seed going into the ground. Now, the seeder should be functioning and it should be working, and it will work most of the time. But inevitably, things can jam, things can break, settings can be off, and you might want to seed every 2 inches. But this is all happening in the soil, away from you, by your feet, getting covered back up with soil. You can't see the seeds going in the ground. If you're seeding a cell tray, you can visually put seeds where you need them to be in very precise quantities. When you're direct seeding, you can't do that. So this is why you always weigh your seed as a check. What do I mean by that? If I'm going to seed a bed, I would know I need 30 grams of seed on this bed, making that number up. I weigh the seed, I pour it into the seeder, and then I seed the bed. And when I'm done, I weigh it. Now I compare the start weight to the end weight, and the difference should be about 30 grams. If it's something like 10, if it's something like 10, then I know I had a major issue. There wasn't enough seed dropped. If I have 60, is the difference? Well, it put down twice as much seed as I wanted. Now that's a problem. So by weighing it, you can identify potential problems ahead of time. It's a quick, easy step, a little hack that you can do. It is an extra step, but a lot of pro growers will do this. They'll weigh their seed to make sure the right amount of seed gets into the bed. So those are the drawbacks. Now I have a category called maybe a drawback. All right. Maybe a drawback, depending on your views, your look, your context of farming. It requires bed preparation. If you're in a no-till type system, you can't direct seed. A seeder needs to go through soil that has tilth to it. Imagine you took your hand in a kung fu karate chop motion, you put it in the soil. You need to be able to pull your hand through that soil cleanly. If your hand is like bumping up like this, you can't get your hand into the soil. Your push seeder is not going to work. This isn't like a no-till drill that you'd use on a 100-acre farm. This needs loose soil to work in the top 2 inches. So that has to be loose for the seeder to get through it, deposit the seed, and then cover the seed back up. So that's going to require some bed preparation. Looking ahead, transplanting doesn't necessarily require that. You could transplant into an unprepared bed. It might be slower, but you could do it. So given that it requires bed preparation, this can't be done on a small scale with true no-till. I mean, zero tillage, like we're not raking the soil or nothing. It's just the soil is what it is. We never mess with it. You're not going to use a direct seeder for that. It won't work. You cannot use this with a mulch system, whether you use a straw mulch or a wood chip mulch. The seeder's not going to cut through that. It's not going to snow plow. It's not going to push it out of the way and then put the mulch back. You're going to end up with a disaster. You'd have to pull the mulch off, seed, and then put the mulch back on, and then maybe the crop grows up through it, or let it germinate and then put the mulch back on around it. You'd have to figure that out if that's your thing, but don't expect to have a mulch-based system and just push your jang through it. Not happening. So this may or may not be a drawback because you might not even be doing this, so it's a non-factor to begin with. And another one is this can't be used with landscape fabric, obviously. Landscape fabric with holes cut in it, people use that to control weed pressure, and they hand transplant into the holes. So the plant they want with their transplanting grows in the hole. The landscape fabric blacks out the rest of the bed. preventing weeds from growing up through it. If you're direct seeding, you obviously cannot use landscape fabric. So you're going to have your weed pressure under control, because by default, no landscape fabric means if weeds are coming in the bed, you have to cultivate to do it. So cultivation has to be on point. Shifting gears, transplanting. When would you potentially want to transplant? Well, there's five main reasons why I think you would do it, 5 benefits. 1, you can have ideal controlled germination conditions, meaning potentially better germination. When I talk transplanting, let's back up a little. What I mean by that is you're starting seeds in a tray, in a greenhouse, nursery house. You're growing them up to size, and then you're getting them into the field somehow. You're either transplanting them by hand or you're using something like a paper pot transplanter. Either way, we're lumping into transplanting. When you germinate in a greenhouse, you can control all the conditions. You can use germination chambers and all sorts of fancy equipment to get the humidity, the temperature, the light, the soil mix, all of that exactly where you want. So in theory, you can really dial that in. So you should be able to, with good quality seed, get 100% or near 100% germination. You can't always get that in the field. Some crops you can, some crops you can't, and growers will know which crops are more finicky than others, and which ones just have to be transplanted. Beets is a good example. I don't know many people who direct seed beets because they just don't get good in-field germination. It should be an easy one to direct seed, because it's a big seed, so it should go into the soil nice so you can space it out. You don't get a lot of good germination in field, so people transplant that typically on a market gardening scale. Other benefits of transplanting. You can stack production. So follow me here. I have 2 beds. We're going to direct seed one, and we're going to transplant one. Direct seed one, it's day 0. Put the crop in the ground. Okay. I have to now wait for that crop to germinate in that bed in the field for 7 to 14 days, whatever it is in your conditions. So that bed's occupied. I'm not getting any yield out of it or anything during those days because the crop's germinating. If I used in bed 2, hand transplanted that same crop, I could have gone back in time by 2 weeks, started that crop, or gone back in time 4 weeks, started that crop in the nursery where it takes up much less space. And then I transplant it on day 0, and I'm starting with already that 30-day-old transplant or 21-day-old transplant, whatever it is. So I'm not using precious bed space to germinate. That germination step is taking place in the nursery, where I can gain efficiency by going vertical, putting things in cell trays to get things really tight. So I can stack production and tighten it up. I can get more rotations per year by germinating in a greenhouse. We can do a whole video on that in the future. It's a more complex topic, but leaning into that, one crop can grow 30 days in the nursery while there's another crop in the field. So while my crop is germinating in the nursery, something else is growing in the field. And as soon as that one comes out of the field, I can take what had already germinated in the nursery for the past 30 days and go right into it the next day. No downtime. And for people on a limited land base, this is key. If you have 1 million beds and unlimited land, not so important. But if you have a limited land base and a limited number of beds, this is definitely a reason why people transplant. It always works. This is another reason. Some crops cannot be direct seeded with a high rate of success. Beets, Salinova's one you would never direct seed. A lot of flowers, you're not direct seeding, maybe because the seed is too small. Some flower seed is dust, and it might need light to germinate and all sorts of specific conditions, you're not going to find a seeder that can do that efficiently. So you're going to have to hand transplant it. So the crop itself may dictate that you have to transplant. And it usually, well, not usually, it always works if you have good quality seed, or unless you just totally screw something up. Where when you direct seed, it doesn't always work because you can't control the conditions out there. A bird could get the seed, the weather can be bad, you get it. Transplanting may be a benefit, but it can be used in a mulch, no-till, or landscape fabric-based system because you are putting the plug into the bed by hand. And doing that as a human, you can put it wherever you want. You can move the mulch and plant. You can put it in the hole in landscape fabric. If you're no-till, you could use a little shovel or tool or something to make a hole, drop it in. So you're more involved, but you can make it work in any of those systems. And it can be used to get a head start on the season. If it's too cold, if the soil temperatures are too low for a crop to germinate in April, March, May, whatever it is, you can direct seed them all day long. But if the soil temperature needs to be, 60 degrees and the soil temperature is 50, the seed's just sitting there. You're wasting time. It's a hope and a prayer. If it's in a greenhouse, you can set the conditions to exactly what you want. You can get that guaranteed germination and then hand transplant into the field. So you can get a jump start on the season. If you know your soil temperature isn't up to optimum for direct seeding until May 1st, before May 1st, you're just transplanting that crop. So you're getting that crop into rotation much faster than you could if you're only direct seeding. Lesser benefits, there's potentially or no disease pressure or pest pressure because you're in a controlled situation. If you're in a controlled situation, you can usually control the pests. You can usually control your potting mix, keep it disease-free, that type of thing. In the soil, in the wild, you can't always control that. There's less water usage if that's a thing. If you direct seed a crop into a bed block, you have to water that whole block. So the pathways are getting watered, the rest of the bed's getting watered. You're putting a lot of water down. If I water cell trays, I just water those trays. I'm using less. If that's a concern to you, that's important. This is definitely less water intense in the germination phase. And you can achieve the exact desired planting density. While seeders like the Jang are very precise, you can't see the seed going into the ground. So you don't always know. And I think most growers are okay with this. They're not micromanaging it and thinking this. But when I hand transplant, I can put plants exactly where I want. When I direct seed, I'm putting seeds approximately where I want. And usually approximately is good enough. But if you need exact placement, then you have to hand transplant. So then you're not overseeding, you're not doing thinning, and you're getting that precise placement. But again, transplanting, not a free lunch. What are the drawbacks? Labor intense. It's extremely labor intense, both in terms of physical wear and tear and time. All of that means money. Okay. And there's more money coming in the drawbacks. So labor-wise, it's time consuming. It will cost you more. So when you look at the benefits, you weigh that against the costs. The costs may be small compared to the benefits. So these costs may all be moot, but be aware there are costs to doing this. It's time consuming. If you think about the process of transplanting, you have to get your trays, fill them with soil, seed them, water them, put them in the germination chamber, take them out, baby them for 30 days, then transplant them into the field. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of touching. That's all complex. That's another drawback. It's multiple steps. That means it's harder to train somebody to do it. There's more chance something gets screwed up, forgotten. It's harder. The simpler things are, the better in farming and in life. The more complex it is, the easier it is to screw it up and make things go wrong. This requires, On a market gardening sales, it requires a large number of trays, salad trays, paper pot trays, whatever it is. If you're doing this at scale, you have to buy those trays. Those trays cost money. They add up. You have to store them. You have to clean them. They are reusable, but it is a big upfront investment and an ongoing investment in terms of storage and keeping them clean. Another drawback is it requires consumables. The seeder, nothing was consumed. When you transplant, there are consumables. Potting soil, paper chain pots if you're using the paper chain pot system. Those things are one and done. You have to keep buying them. Maybe a minor cost in the grand scheme of things, and we'll talk about that in future videos, but it's a cost that should be considered. You are consuming resources that are only used once when you do transplanting compared to direct seeding. All of this, it's difficult to train somebody to do it. It's not easy. It's one thing to say, push this up and down the field on these lines. It's another thing to say, all right, fill the soil, pack it this much, water it this much seed goes into it. It needs to go here for this amount of time. Then you move it over here for this amount of time. Then it's ready to transplant after this many days, but you don't transplant it unless the crop looks like this. If it doesn't look like this, we have to leave it in the nursery a few more days. Oh, conditions aren't right. We're not going to transplant it now. That's a lot of knowledge and experience, not easy to train somebody to do, so a consideration. A potential drawback? Possible. Transplant shock with root disturbance? How much that affects things? TBD. There's a lot of people who say it's really a problem. Is it really a problem? I don't know. It could be, it could not be. Like, there's a lot of gray area bro science here that I don't think has results. You know what works. If you're having trouble with transplanting stuff, it's probably more a result of your process or your conditions than transplanting itself. I mean, there are growers out here in the lower region of California, Arizona, they're transplanting thousands of acres using hand transplants. They've figured it out. They've got it to work very successfully. If they can do it, you can do it. So while it may not be optimum compared to what a gardener would do, it's usually pretty good, but nonetheless, there is some transplant shock. And the other risk here is if you lose your transplant towards the end of the cycle, you're behind 30 days. So say we have a transplant, we start it, a seed, we start the seed, 30 days later, we're ready to transplant, we get a heat wave, something happens to our transplant in the greenhouse, they die, we're out those 30 days, we have to start over. If we direct seed, that's usually a much shorter cycle because we can identify problems very quickly. If we plant today with a direct seed, we can usually see the seed come up 7 to 14 days later. So if we notice bad germination issues or something like that, we can nip it in the bud much sooner. Not a huge drawback, but again, something to consider. So think about all these things when you're doing it. Now let's compare the steps so you have some idea of A versus B. And we will assume that all beds are prepped. So we're not including bed prep in either of these comparisons. If I direct seed a standard market garden bed, 30 inches wide, 100 feet long, that's probably done in less than 15 minutes. And I'm including in that 15 minutes, getting the seeder, putting the roller in it, weighing the seed, walking the seeder up and down the beds, even marking the bed if you have to mark them, and then reweighing the seed. It should be very quick. It's easy. It's fast. If you are transplanting a single bed, same size, we have to account for the whole process, not just the process of hand transplanting, but we also have to account for the time that went into growing out those transplants, which means filling nursery flats, seeding the nursery flats, tending to those seedlings for 30 days, marking the bed because you need to know where to put all these plants, laying out the seedlings, and then transplanting them into the ground. And then you do have to wash the trays, or you should do something to the trays to make sure they're clean and sterile, or at least sanitized for the next crop. That's probably closer to 2 hours all in, depending on how fast you can transplant and how optimized and dialed your system is in. We can play around with those numbers all day, but transplanting, using these numbers is 8 times longer. It's going to be significantly longer, whatever the numbers are. You might tell me, 120 minutes is a bunch of crap. That's not accurate at all. It should be this, or 15 minutes is totally wrong. Ask any market farmer. Way longer to transplant than it is to direct seed. So, knowing that, it comes down to when you go to decide what to do with your crop, you think, all right, I want to do what's fast. Fast is cheap. Fast is usually easy. And I want to do that. What are the things I think about to prevent me from doing that? Will this crop transplant effectively? No. Then I must transplant it. I don't have a choice. Do I have optimum germination conditions outside? No. Then I should do this. So all these things are things to think about. If you do want to get a transplanter, if you do want to get a direct seeder, check out our shop at shop.moderngrower.co. We have the full line of Jang seeders. There's both a single row and a 5-row. 5-row just means you can seed 5 rows at one time, which saves you 4 passes up the bed or down the bed. And we also sell paper pot transplanters. So we're one of the original people to sell it. We sell the original paper pot transplanter. We've sold thousands of those in the US to market gardeners for the past 7 years, and they've been very successful using them. So if you have questions on any of that equipment or anything, reach out to us at hello@moderngrower.co, leave a comment below, and consider these factors when deciding what you want to do for your crop on your farm in terms of direct seeding or transplanting. Thanks for watching. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.